I'd like to call this Citizens Budget Review Advisory Committee meeting to order. It's 6 p.m. on Monday, July the 31st. Let's start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, let's please have a roll call.
Mr. Herlihy?
Here.
Mr. Slavin? Absent?
I was notified.
Excused?
I was notified by email on Tim.
Excused.
Excused, yes. He's out of town.
Mr. Napier?
Present.
Mr. Frank?
No word.
Absent?
Is he excused?
I haven't had any advance warning from him, so.
And it's unexcused.
Mr. Moda?
Here.
Mr. Hoffman?
Present.
Mr. Hall?
Here.
Ms. Flaherty's absent. Ms. Ring?
Here.
Have a quorum.
Okay. Next is the approval of the minutes for the meeting of July the 10th.
So moved.
I had a point of discussion on these minutes. I was a little confused when we did the one motion, and I think, Bruce, it was your motion, where we decided that we would request that the city council review or consider the extra millage for that. But when I read the minutes of the city council meeting, it appears that they were told that the committee recommended setting up a fund for that. We didn't do that.
You're on page 5.
Yeah. Your,
Yeah, Ed's motion minus the last slide, right?
yeah, that the board discussed the establishment of a cushion during the next 3 years to ease the burden and asked the council to
Yeah.
consider such a cushion over the summer.
Well, we gave them serious thought and consideration. It doesn't say anything about establishing a fund in there, the way the minutes are presented.
Oh, I think that's the way I took what I read on the copy of the minutes from the council meeting. Was that not what you told them, Ed?
I did not get into a conversation with Mr. Dodd, Counselor Dodd, about what he said. I presented basically what we had talked about, and I said there were numerous ideas put out, one of them being the idea of a fund, if you want to think about it. And that was that. Now,
Okay.
to continue, well, we'll talk about what the reaction was later on.
Well, I haven't seen that meeting yet. I was out of town when they had that.
Yeah, that was the slide.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But now that last slide came out of the presentation and went to council, right?
yeah. And that's the one that was sent to everybody on this committee.
Right,
Okay?
right.
So that's what
I
was
couldn't
used.
tell whether the last slide had been removed or not, because I haven't seen the rerun of the meeting yet, so I don't really know.
Yeah, that slide was used.
Okay, all right. Then I have no
Mr.
further
Chairman.
questions. All those in favor, anybody else have any question on the minutes?
Along those lines, item 5 on that slide, was that taken out? I got a copy of the presentation, but then I got another one saying that it had been revised, but I couldn't open it on my computer from out of town, so I didn't know if that was still on there or not. The one that spoke to setting up a contingency or a fund for the possibility of.
That was the last slide, and that was what was presented to the city council.
So it was presented to the city council.
Yes, because it was sent to everyone on this committee 2 days in advance, and it had been discussed at the last meeting.
I thought that had been
I thought the
voted down.
recommendation was to approve everything in that presentation except that last slide. That's clearly what the minutes say. Right or wrong?
Then I missed it totally because I sent to Ken what we approved, and with a couple of changes that we discussed, which had nothing to do with that last slide, and it was sent to all of you 2 days in advance, and nobody said a word about it.
Did they say it now? Okay, this is a slide, as Ed said, that we sent in advance to the committee before the city council meeting, reflecting that we had taken out the previous last slide and substituted this one, which clearly said that, you know, it was a suggestion to be considered. There was nothing spoken to about a special fund.
I was at council meeting, and the way I remember it is the budget was presented the way we had asked it to be presented without that last slide. And it was only after the budget was talked about that Ed came back to the podium and talked about that last slide that was really not part of the committee's, presentation to the council. That's the way I remember it. We did the one presentation without that slide, and then Ed came back afterwards and did that last slide. Do you remember it? That's where I was there, but, I was half paying attention at the time, sorry.
No, ma'am, I presented the whole thing at once, including that slide.
Oh, okay, all right. The whole thing at one time.
Is everybody clear now?
Okay, yeah. Sure.
I'm
I'm still a
still
little
unclear as
confused because I
to,
thought the motion was to remove that last page.
That was my motion, as written in the minutes. The minutes are accurate as far
And
as
that's
I'm
what got
concerned.
approved, but yet that's not what we gave the city council. We gave them that last page, which was clearly not what this committee voted to do.
and that was my concern too.
Right or wrong? Wasn't that vote 5-1?
If you look at page 5 of our minutes, you see that that Mr. Hoffman made the motion, minus the last slide be presented, and he went on to say, but that we want them to give serious thought and consideration to the future homestead exemption referendum, which would require a tax increase at some time in the future. So to give serious thought and consideration, which is exactly the way Ed put it in the revised last slide. So he did what the committee requested by dropping the slide, and he made the new slide reflect the motion, in my opinion.
So he put another slide in its place then, that's what you're saying?
Otherwise, it would have been misleading.
This was modified, and that's why it was sent out again.
Okay.
If I may add, I was also at the same city council meeting. I think the majority of the city council members saw what went on during the last Budget Review Advisory Committee meeting. I think they were on a consensus of what was voted on, and I think they were in agreement of kind of hesitancy about that special fund due to the homestead exemption. So I think they understood what our point was, regardless of what happened with the PowerPoint.
Okay, I'm ready for, we've had a motion and a second on approval of the minutes. Let's have a roll call, please.
Mr. Herlihy?
Yes,
Mr. Napier?
Yes.
Mr. Moda?
Yes.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes?
Mr. Hall,
Aye.
Ms. Ring.
Yes.
The motion passes.
Okay, we're up to unfinished business. Budget update. Ken, you're on.
Okay, so at the July 12th meeting, the city council did set the proposed millage at the 3.8. It was only a 3-2 vote. And actually, the motion before that failed 2-3 to set the millage at 3.5, which is kind of a rounded off rollback rate. But I did want to bring you up to date that the proposed millage then and what goes on the tax notices would be at the 3.8 mils. We still have a budget that is balanced on 3.4 mils. We are still paying back the reserves for the voluntary retirement program in the amount of $91,252, which was the last installment of what the cost of that program was calculated to be. We did get an update last week on the employee health insurance. We had put in the budget 10% increase in the rates. The good news is we would need to switch carriers, but through the results of an RFP, the increase would only be 2.3%. So, very good news in that respect. It's going to be decided, I guess, during the between now and the final budget hearings of the city council, what to do with that. I guess you would call savings, or that extra money that's now in the budget at the 3.4 mils. I think at a minimum, we don't have the calculations per employee. We haven't gone through and revised all those numbers. My estimate is at least about $70,000. If you applied that, if it was chosen to do this, to reduce the millage further, you would then be at a millage of 3.34 as opposed to the 3.4. 3.34 instead of 3.40.
The savings, Ken, is the difference, that 7.7% difference only amounts to $7,000?
That's my minimum estimate.
Okay, 7 to 10 or something?
It could be $10,000-$15,000 more than that. I wouldn't be surprised. But once we apply it to the employee, to each employee, and depending on whether they chose family coverage or not, and update those numbers, then but we should have that number within the next day or so. Another alternative is, rather than reducing the millage further, is one thing we negotiated last year in the labor agreements was to, instead of having a step pay plan where we had increments of 3% steps, we were locked in. If we had an employee that was really a super performer, or if we had an employee that took on additional job responsibilities, we had no provision in the labor contract to compensate or to adjust that pay rate. In our negotiations, it was made clear to the bargaining unit that we wanted to set up ranges of pay for each position, and subject to funds being available, we could recognize such an employee and give them some increase, but not necessarily 3%. Maybe it's 1%, maybe it's 4%, but we'd have some flexibility. We acknowledged to the union, though, we really had not set aside any monies in which to fund that additional pay rate. So one thing I would like to see in this coming year budget, and we still don't have it balanced at the 3.4 mils, but if we've got the opportunity now from the insurance savings, I would like to see some of that carved out, set in an account that's under a lump sum under the control of the city manager, that he could then make a transfer to the appropriate budget that that employee is in and be able to have that flexibility. I think if we were able to do that, I think it'll help in our discussions of the bargaining group this year, which only has the wage opener. There's other options, you know, that we could allocate some of that money for wellness programs or do something that would maybe help our insurance down the road, our insurance costs. So at this point, I don't have a really good number, whether it's 70,000 or 80 or 90 even, but we should have that number, like I say, shortly, but we just weren't able to get it prepared before tonight.
Excuse me, Ken.
Yes.
On that, that thought about the incentives, either above or below the 3% for employees. If you allocated what 3% would be across the board, and then set that total amount as the pot that would be for pay increases, so that the non-performer would get 1% and the overachiever might get 4 or 4.5, you could still stay within the budget and there'd be no increase required, and still have those funds left available for maybe the wellness program and so forth.
Actually, that would be a much harder sell to the bargaining unit, I'm sure, because
Right.
some of the members, you know, would be looking at it and say, well, I'm not going to get anything. They don't like me here, you know. But, I mean, that is a viable option to set up that way, sure.
Yeah, I'm sure the senior staff would not be crazy about it, but the younger staff would. Historically, that's the way it plays out.
Yes. Speaking of the waging negotiations, we had an initial impromptu meeting with the bargaining agent. I basically outlined to him what our parameters were pretty much set at, and he was going to go back to the membership, have discussions with the bargaining unit, and get back to me to set up an official negotiation session so that we could hash that out and get their approval or something to get that number firmed up. This seems to be a night we're correcting the record, but also in the council minutes, there was a statement made during the discussion of the rollback that when this exemption is adopted, assuming it is adopted, that the following year, the rollback rate would become a roll forward rate, and thus it would be advertised as not being a tax increase, because the rollback rate would give you the same revenues as the previous year. And obviously, if we lose the homestead values, or the additional homestead values, we'd have a rollback that would be a positive amount. The legislature anticipated that. They actually had two bills. One, they implemented the ballot on the additional homestead exemption. They followed that with a second bill that specifically states that the amount of homestead exemption values lost would not be used in the computation. My best guesstimates of what that homestead number is probably a 10, 11% tax increase, or increase in millage over like what we would be at the 3.4. I believe we'll be back to the 3.8 mills. So that if you imagine the tax notices and the advertisement for the budget hearings would be stating specifically that the city council is increasing taxes by 11 or 12%. And the wording is required. We can't put qualifiers on that and say, due to the state's awarding of this extra homestead exemption, you know, will not have a tax increase. But that's what we'll be faced with. I think some people may be thinking that the amount of the increase would be even higher than the 11% number. It's not, we're just not able to tell until we know what values are that year, because each property would have to be within a value of more than 100,000. And if they're not the full 125,000 value, they wouldn't get the full 25,000. So if somebody got that 110, we're only going to lose 10,000 more of their taxable value to the exemptions.
But
So, I
that
mean,
wouldn't
that's
have anything to do with the 3.4 millage rate that you got now, because that will be in another year. That won't
Yeah,
be
and I'm
in
making
the
an
current
assumption,
year.
you know,
And we still don't know what those values are gonna be.
if nothing else changed, if we didn't have growth in the tax roll, and we still had a millage at 3.4 2 years from now, then that's the kind of impact it would have, you know. So, of course, the additional values are excluded from the rollback calculation, so that wouldn't have any impact that year in terms of what's advertised as a tax increase. But just want to give you a rough idea of kind of the numbers and the political impact there might be in those future years. We've got a budget workshop on the agenda, or will be on the agenda for next week's city council meeting. I'm going to give them, I've already given them a lot of information about the millage and the general fund budget in their discussions of the proposed millage, but so I'm going to go over that in a very sketchy way at next week's meeting. But also, even though they got in the draft budget what we had intended for the enterprise funds and the special revenue funds, I want to do basically the presentation I made to this committee initially, which includes the total city budget. So I wanted to make you aware that since the original draft that I gave to the committee, or to the board, I should say, we settled on going with a capital lease for replacing the golf carts. So we've got a 5-year capital lease that was approved by the city council. On the RFP for the restaurant, we've interviewed the 2 parties that submitted proposals. We are very close to ranking the leading contender and beginning negotiations with that party. We haven't made a final decision as of today. It should be coming very shortly. That would be a staff decision to proceed with negotiations and eventually bring that back to the city council. We found some other changes. There was a discrepancy. Our airport showed rental revenue for the golf course at a different number than the golf course had budgeted to pay, so we're reconciling that to the correct number. Didn't make any changes to the building fund. And throughout the special revenue funds, we did change the funding for the pickleball project. You may recall there was some disappointment in the bids that were originally received on that, so that's been restructured, and we're allocating the money from we're changing the funding of the pickleball from the recreation impact fee accounts to the discretionary sales taxes, and constructing it to build 4 courts this coming year, and then the following 4 would be done the year after that. We had split the ball field lighting into, we were going to bridge the end of next year and the beginning of the following year. We restructured that and just put the entire funding in next fiscal year for the entire project, rather than playing the game of trying to split the cost to fund it in 2 different years. We can handle that out of the DST money, so we went ahead and restructured that in our current document of the budget. I will say that after we do the changes to the actual numbers on the insurance, After we have the meeting next week with the city council, we'll update the website with the numbers so that when we go into the September hearings, that the public is looking at a budget that is being recommended for the first reading. Any questions about the update or any further questions?
Yeah, is that number, because I first heard you to say that that's 7.7% savings on health insurance was $70,000 thereabouts, then I heard Bruce say 7,000, and you seemed to shake your head yes. Which number is it, 7 or 70?
70.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, we have about
70.
70, not 7.
Oh, and then I missed, that's why
Yeah,
I
I'm
questioned
I'm
it.
glad you clarified that. Yeah,
That's the reason I wanted to bring the question up, because that's not chump change, that's a significant amount of money.
Yeah, that is $7,000. I was like, why are we even worried about
Yeah,
this?
because I thought he said 70. 70 to 80, I think, was the number. And that depends on what their census is when you actually send a renewal in.
Right.
Who's got family, who's got single coverage, who's got what.
that could change. But yeah, I understand that our health insurance cost is close to between $900 and $1 million. So when we were budgeting 10%, we were budgeting close to 100,000, and if we only need 23,000 instead of
That's what I thought.
77,000.
I thought Bruce said 7,000, and I thought he missed it.
I mean, what we are going to do though is at least update the numbers to the extent that we know them, like, you know, the employees as
So
they
you intend
currently
to
are,
change the health insurance number then in the budgets?
to our best guesstimate, yeah.
Yeah,
Now,
okay.
we don't have the open enrollment, and they don't actually have to sign up for it until later in September. So it's
Right.
gonna be dicey getting exact numbers in there, but we should be able to cover, you know, worst case scenario and
Or
still.
are you looking for a recommendation of what to do with that money, or have you already decided what you want to do with it?
We haven't formally decided how we're going to throw it out to the council. I'm just kind of
I
throwing
think
out
that's where Bruce was going
possibilities.
with it. He was wanting to make a recommendation, but he thought it was only $7,000, so it wasn't worth the time and
Worth the
effort to
time,
make a
yeah.
motion.
But I don't know, if the committee wants to take a position on that,
Well, we might want to look at it. I mean, I don't know over the years. I don't know how many times you had increases. I know you went for wealthy employees, didn't get raises, and they had to pay more of their health insurance. And I'm sure it's a collective bargaining issue, because I'm sure that clause is in the CBAs with each of the unions.
not for this year, though. We're only required to open negotiations on the wage clause for
Oh,
this
okay.
year and next year.
So then you could take that extra money and pay a little bit more on the employer dependent, whatever they had to pick up before when they didn't get pay raises.
That's one option we've considered. However, we did make quite an adjustment. We took the bids in constructing this year's budget from last year's RFP process and insurance bids, because our employee cost was like outrageous and out of line with other agencies and our competition. And we did get them down to a reasonable amount. I guess, you know, the freer it is to the employee, the more applicants would like and current employees would like, but yeah, I doubt whether it's really necessary at this point. I mean, we feel we've got them to a pretty good level, and that was part of our negotiation strategy last year, as we were kind of trading off on some other language provisions and able to get that.
It was just a thought. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much money. I mean, for the city's budget. Anybody else have any comments about that?
Yes, if I could. Any thoughts given or consideration to additional funding to the police pension fund using those spare funds? Didn't come up.
Honestly, I haven't really gone there, but I mean, it wouldn't be needed for the actuarial required contribution, but as far as the unfunded
Yeah,
amount.
just a way of,
Improve the position of the
improve the position of the
pension
fund.
fund and in terms of its overall health.
Ken, what's our unfunded liability in that police pension? Do you know offhand?
Offhand,
I'd rather, if I would, Ed, I'd rather you come back to the committee at some time in the future and make a presentation on the pension fund and its position, so that,
Well, it's around 14%, right? According to the capper, it was funded at like 86%, which is
Well-
considered great in the state of Florida.
yes, but let me update you. Because also at the very last, not the meeting when they talked about proposed millage, but the last meeting, we had the first reading of an amendment to the police pension plan ordinance. That will institute a drop option and an employee buyback option if they've got previous military or police agency service. That won't cost the pension plan anything. It's designed such that those programs will not increase the position of the pension plan. But there were two things that will. One is we had employees hired after October 1st of 2012 that were under a different tier than the long-term employees. Long-term, we were deducting 8% from their pay as the employee contribution, and they were getting and continue to get 3% per year of service. Back in 2012, we said, okay, anybody hired after that date, you are only going to be, we're only going to deduct 5% of your pay, but you're only going to get 2% per year, 2 or 2.5, excuse me. I believe it was 2% per year of service. We didn't like that from a recruitment point of view because we were out in the marketplace where most other plans were at the 3% per year. So part of our negotiations this last year of the labor agreement with PBA was we pledged basically to enact changes to the ordinance to bring everybody back to the 8% deducted from your pay, but it buys you a 3% per year credit towards your retirement. That didn't affect the fund actuarially all that much because we did have the additional monies coming from the employee, and we had state funds where the law had changed, and by mutual agreement, well, we had a choice, really. The default was all the money needed to be divided up by all the officers and put in a deferred compensation account, depending on their years of service. The option they put in the plan, or in the statute, was that we could switch to, by mutual agreement with the bargaining group, we could take as much as all of the money, have it then count towards the city's contribution. But what we did, we agreed, okay, well, if you guys sign over all the state funds, because there was a frozen amount back when we implemented, but so they basically signed over all the state funds that we get from now on, as long as the mutual agreement holds. All the state funds will come and count towards additional contributions, and we're using those proceeds then to pay for the change in the benefit rate, get everybody on the same tier. And the other change that this ordinance on the first reading approved was a cost of living. 1%, not huge, but a 1% increase in their pension payment if they are over are retired and over 58 years old for all future retirees. So we're not going back retroactive to previous retirees and doing anything in that basis, but anybody that retires in the future would be eligible after they reach age 58 to a 1% increase annually. And that is all basically funded from the state, additional state monies that came in. But if that's not enough of a briefing and you want more, you know, something
Well,
black
that is
and
a
white to
type
look
of
at,
extra
I'll be glad to
benefit for the
follow up.
members of the, that is a type of an extra benefit for the members, because they didn't have a COLA now built into their pension plan, correct?
Correct. And that was the most expensive, I mean,
Right.
even though it doesn't sound like a lot, 1%, when you do it
Well, that number gets bigger
actuarially
every
and
year, though.
forever, it adds up.
Okay. You good, Bruce, with that? Are you gonna want more?
That's good for tonight.
You know, I'd be glad to take time during the day or bring it up at a future meeting if the other members are interested. It's your call.
Well, we've only got one more scheduled meeting, right?
We've got a meeting 2 weeks out.
August 14th.
That was really designed for the review of the
quarterly
third quarter
review.
report, but it certainly could be
Right.
added to the agenda to further discuss the budget or the pension plan itself, or if you like, I'll place it on the agenda, and if you don't need to hear it, you can cut me off and say,
I'll
I
leave
know
that up
enough.
to Bruce if he wants to see it. I mean, I'd be happy just getting a copy of the ordinance and reading it, and I can get that, I can get
On
that
the web?
online. I really don't need anything. I can read that on your website. But if
Well,
it's up to
pension-
you, Bruce.
Pension plans are like Social Security and Medicare. If you don't deal with them now,
Oh.
they just get kicked down the road, and eventually somebody's gonna wind up with it in there and have to deal with it. And, you know, we can say we're well enough off compared to other people, but that doesn't mean you're fiscally sound as to where you
Well,
should be.
I
And
know
it-
there's a board and investment advisors that look at those funds as well, right? Plus you.
we
I
have
mean,
the
you've got an
professional
investment
managers.
advisor and you've got a pension committee that's made up by ordinance.
But although we've had all that kind of expert help, Bruce, I know with his experience on the pension
Well, I
board,
know he was on that committee, yeah.
we've
But if
had,
you want to see more, Bruce, that's fine. Well, I kind of looked at the number in the CAFR and. That's a very technical discussion. Yeah, well, when I see a pension fund that's 86% funded, to me, that's, I mean, in the world of government pensions, that's a pretty healthy pension fund.
well, and, you know,
Actuarial numbers.
I've got an official impact statement on order from the actuary to present with the second reading of the ordinance, which is required by state statute. The early indications are his prediction is still going to be that our funding is just above 80%. We've lost ground from the 86% that Bruce is recalling. So you know we got professionals on the investment side. We've also recently implemented some changes to the investment program to diversify, and whereas before we had all our money basically with one money manager that was giving us the difference between equities and bonds, we are splitting that and having about 5 different managers.
Well, you have an investment advisor that watches what they do with the portfolio, right, and sees that they keep the portfolio and the ranges set up in the investment plan.
Even so, we have not met our projected investment returns for a number of years.
Yeah, and you got a little too much in equities too. You're over your policy in equities, by the way, which I'm sure you know. That's not supposed to happen with you. These people are supposed to advise you that you need to amend your policy or you need to get it back in line.
I thought we had, but
I think it's still a little heavy on equities.
Well, does the question come down to, would it be, or is it, a good thing to do to put more money into that pension plan?
I can give you some rough numbers that logically tells me you're not going to buy a lot with it, because the actuary is looking over an extended time frame. You know, he's calculating what kind of level of funding you have to have over basically a rate over the next 25 to 30 years. So if you take 1/25 or 1/30 of the $70,000, you're not going to reduce or add to the pot significantly enough to really make a major move in the status of the funding.
Well, the question is, should we make a major move? I'm just throwing this out for talking purposes.
I would suggest we leave that up to the city manager and his CFO and the people that negotiate on the bargaining units, because that pension is a part of bargaining unit discussions, right?
Not this year.
Not this year, it's not an opener, but
Yeah.
I'm sure it will be on there. What is that, every 3 years you open up everything?
But on the other hand, I mean, there are methods to, with agreement, to modify the labor agreement too. I mean, it's not, if it's something that's in their best interest, then they wouldn't stop you from doing it. But those are good thoughts. I appreciate that. I'll pursue it.
Well, along those same lines, do we have any OPEB liability?
I'm sorry?
Do we have any OPEB liability, other post-employment benefits?
It's minor. It's like 25,000 or something, the latest count. For someone to continue their health insurance, first they have to have 20 years service with the city. And we only pay 2 years worth of premiums. So when the actuary, we've had a professional actuary calculate it for us, and it came out to, it's just a bothersome bookkeeping thing that we do at the end of each year to adjust for that, but we're very fortunate compared to other agencies, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I know Gatsby is pretty strong on that area.
Yes.
I had a question on the ball field lighting. You said that
Mm-hmm.
going to move it into next year's budget. Which budget are you talking about, the 18 or the 19 year budget?
Okay. We had the first phase of it budgeted in this coming year, the fiscal year 18 budget. We're currently in the 17, we're working on the 18. So we had it split between 18 and 19. And then we were going to say, well, we wouldn't start the project till August or September, it wouldn't be completed, and the rest of the bills would come in the following year. It was a bad plan, so we've corrected that and said it'll all be done in fiscal year 18, which means as soon as October, it could begin.
So it's all budgeted in the coming 18 budget?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is that it? You finished with that part?
Yes.
That brings us to public input. And since I see no members of the general public here, I assume we have no public input. So we'll move on to new business. There's none there, and we're at staff matters. Ken?
I have nothing further.
Board matters. Comments and discussions by individual members. I believe we started down there. Bruce, we'll start with you this time.
Nothing tonight.
Ed?
Just to finish up, the discussion that went on at city council about building the quote cushion fund, it was split. Pretty much, it was split 3-2, I would say, although a vote wasn't taken, but I would say that the 3 people who voted for 3.8 thought positively about the idea, but wanted a lot more discussion about it. And that's the sum and substance of that whole discussion that went on regarding that last slide. There was one counselor in particular who was very positive about it and thought it was a good idea, and in fact there were 2 on the prevailing side. So where they go with it, who knows?
Andrea?
First, I want to thank staff for going over the homestead exemptions with me. I appreciate it. I am homesteaded, but I wanted to understand the other taxpayers in the community who are not homesteaded, and it was very interesting, enlightening. Thank you. And the fund, Mr. Mayor McPartland said that, we can't fence anything in, so any additional funds, I don't know how we could say that they go towards something, because council said we can't fence them in. We can't tell them how to spend it. So those are just my thoughts.
That's the reason it was a recommendation. Harry?
I just want to say, I think that we've had a lot more discussion this year than we did last year on the budget, healthy discussion. I feel it's very positive that we got a lot of items out there and looked at. The budget looks like it's a reasonable budget that I strongly support. And I was just wondering, are we still going to have the third quarter meeting in 2 weeks,
On the 14th.
on the 14th?
Scheduled on the calendar, that was for the review of the third quarter financial reports? That was for the review of the third quarter financial report, so I kind of need you guys to bless it before I take it to the city council.
Okay, then I'll be there.
The following meeting.
Thank you.
Probably not an exciting meeting, but
Is that it, Harry? So, yeah, nothing? The only thing I'm gonna say is, I'll wait and look at the capital budget. I know you've made changes in it. I would still like to see a little extra money in there for roads and drainage improvement, but I'll look at your final number and see what you have. And I'll speak again at it on the 14th. Now, discussion of topics for the next meeting. Bruce, if you want something on there, any member of this committee can ask for something to be placed on that agenda. I want you all to understand that. No problem. If there's something you want on there, we'll ask for it to be put on there and we'll discuss it.
No, I'm fine. I just,
Okay.
We had a short discussion. It's just my recommendation to, I always find it better to put money away than to spend it on something else. When you have a liability and it's unfunded, I think that's a better place to go than to create a new program.
So then I guess we'll just have basically the same agenda, Ken, with the third quarter review on it.
all righty.
Anything else for the good of the order for the meeting? This meeting is adjourned.